30 jaw-dropping houses swapped their walls for glass, some beautifully, some dangerously, all genuinely transparent. Let's start with the house that basically invented this whole genre. Mies van der Rohe built this for Dr. Edith Farnsworth in 1951, a single glass box floating on steel columns above the Fox River floodplain. Here's the twist: it floods. Constantly. The river has smashed through those plate glass walls multiple times, most dramatically in 1996 and again in 2008. And preservationists now raise the entire house on hydraulic jacks whenever a big storm rolls in. A masterpiece that's essentially been fighting its own site for 70 years, and yet it's still owned and operated as a museum by the National Trust, drawing around 11,000 visitors a year who come specifically to see the house that's flooded so many times. Preservationists now describe it as their single most flood-prone historic property in the entire portfolio. The Glass House in New Canaan, Connecticut. Philip Johnson built this the same year as Farnsworth, admittedly inspired by it, and lived inside it for 58 years with his partner David Whitney. One room, glass on all four walls, and only the bathroom gets any privacy, tucked inside a brick cylinder. Johnson called the surrounding forest his wallpaper. He died inside the house in 2005, and it's now a museum you can actually tour, part of a wider 47-acre estate Johnson kept adding smaller experimental buildings to for nearly 6 decades, treating the whole property more like a landscape park than a single piece of architecture, with 14 separate structures altogether by the time he was finished. Maison de Verre in Paris. Built in the early 1930s by Pierre Chirot for a gynecologist and his wife, this one's a steel skeleton wrapped almost entirely in glass block, tucked beneath an apartment because an elderly tenant upstairs simply refused to move out. During the Nazi occupation, German soldiers reportedly tried to requisition it and gave up once they realized that they couldn't figure out how to heat it. The family's furniture survived the war hidden in a barn in rural France, and the house wasn't officially protected as a historic monument until 1992, decades after it had already influenced generations of architects who studied its mechanized walls and sliding partitions long before most of them could visit in person. Casa de Vidro in Sao Paulo. Lina Bo Bardi's own home, finished in 1951, sits up on slender stilts with a glass front that seems to float above the rainforest she planted herself, tree by tree, over 40 decades. She and her husband hosted some of Brazil's biggest artists and intellectuals here. Today, it's one of the most influential works of Latin American modernism, full stop, and it's still surrounded by that same jungle canopy, a landscape that Bo Bardi grew from bare, treeless farmland into the lush setting the house is famous for today, planting nearly every tree on the property with her own hands over the decades she lived there. House NA in Tokyo. Sue Fujimoto's 2011 creation holds an actual Guinness World Record. It's officially the most transparent house on Earth, with 59% of its total surface made of glass. 21 tiny floor plates stack at different heights instead of normal rooms, inspired by what it might feel like to live in a tree. The owners added curtains immediately. Even Fujimoto admits it's too open for his own taste. It sits so quietly on a Tokyo side street that its exact address stayed almost impossible to find online for years, a strange kind of privacy for the world's most transparent house, protected less by walls than by sheer anonymity. Optical Glass House in Hiroshima. Hiroshi Nakamura built this in 2012, facing a busy tram-lined street, using 6,000 individually cast glass blocks to create a shimmering, soundproof curtain wall weighing about 12 tons, suspended on stainless steel bolts 3 meters above street level. Behind it sits a completely private, tree-filled garden. It's basically a fortress made of light, and the casting process for those blocks was so difficult, requiring slow cooling to avoid internal stress, that the architects ended up embracing the tiny surface imperfections since they created unexpected optical distortions nobody had actually planned for, turning what was meant to be a purely optical barrier into the visual centerpiece of the entire home.
7. Stall House, Los Angeles. Case study house number 22, built by Pierre Koenig in 1960 for a family on a $37,500 budget overlooking the Hollywood Hills. Julia Schulman's photo of it, two women in white dresses floating above a carpet of city lights, is one of the most reproduced architecture photographs ever taken, later recognized by Time magazine as one of the most influential images in the publication's entire 200-year history. After 65 years in the Stahl family, it finally went up for sale in late 2025, marketed as a museum-grade architectural artifact, the first time in the house's entire history that anyone outside the original family could actually buy it. 8. Invisible House, Joshua Tree. Film producer Chris Hanley spent 6 years building this 5,500-square-foot mirrored box on 90 acres, completed in 2019, wrapped in heat-reflecting solar-cooled glass that makes it vanish into the desert depending on the light. It's got a 100-foot indoor pool that glows an eerie blue at night, and a primary bedroom built around a 2,500-pound glass bed frame. It listed for $18 million in 2023, and local birds apparently love feasting on the bugs that swarm its reflective walls at night, which, according to the owners, means not a single bird has ever actually crashed into the invisible house. 9. Sheets Goldstein Residence, Los Angeles. John Lautner started this in 1963, then spent 15 more years perfecting it with owner James Goldstein, who bought it in 1972. The coffered concrete ceiling is punctured by 750 individual drinking glass skylights. Goldstein eventually donated the whole property to LACMA, guaranteeing it can never be flipped or altered again, which means one of the most photographed private homes in film history is now technically a permanent piece of a museum's collection, complete with a James Turrell skyscape light installation Goldstein commissioned for the grounds. 10. Villa Tugendhat, Brno, Czech Republic. Mies van der Rohe, again, 20 years before Farnsworth, built for a wealthy couple in 1930. The showstopper? Entire glass walls up to 10 feet high and 20 feet wide that retract straight down into the basement at the push of a button, dissolving the living room into the garden. During World War II, the Gestapo bricked up the glass entry wall and a cavalry unit stabled horses inside, ruining the original linoleum floors and burning the furniture for fuel. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the restoration team spent 2 full years from 2010 to 2012 rebuilding the original glass retraction mechanism so visitors could actually watch that entire wall vanish into the floor again, exactly the way Mies intended in 1930. 11. Chemisphere, Los Angeles. John Lautner's 1960 Flying Saucer, an octagonal glass house perched on a single 29-foot concrete pole because the hillside lot was considered unbuildable at a 45-degree slope. It was originally designed for Leonard Malin, a young aerospace engineer with just $30,000 to spend, and its Chemisphere name actually comes from a sponsorship deal with the sealant company ChemSeal, who supplied experimental coatings in exchange for naming rights. You reach it through funicular. Encyclopedia Britannica once called it the most modern home ever built. It's now owned by Coldplay's Chris Martin, though for years before that, it belonged to German publisher Benedikt Taschen, who bought it in 1998 and restored it after it had sat neglected on the open market for years, considered too eccentric for a normal buyer. 12. Chicken Point Cabin, Northern Idaho. Olson Kundig designed a lake cabin where the entire 30 by 20-foot glass wall pivots open on a hand-cranked gear system that Kundig himself simply calls the Gizmo, moving 6 tons of steel and glass with almost no effort, using the same counterbalance principle as a bicycle's gears. Even a child can operate it. The whole point was making the family physically open their own view every single time, rather than pushing a button. Kundig has said the client's simple instruction was basically open up the house to the view, and he decided to take that literally. 13. Ames House, Pacific Palisades.
Charles and Ray Ames built their steel and glass home and studio in 1949 using leftover, standardized industrial parts. The foundation and frame went up in just 16 hours. They moved in on Christmas Eve and never left. The glass panels are broken up with blocks of primary color, like a Mondrian painting come to life. And Charles and Ray kept using the house as a working design studio right up until their deaths, treating it less like a monument and more like an everyday laboratory for living, filling it with the same folk art and toys they collected on their travels around the world. 14. Curtain Wall House, Tokyo. Shigeru Bon's 1995 answer to Mies. Instead of fixed glass, he hung an actual tent-like fabric curtain at the height of 2 stories in front of sliding glass doors sited at the intersection of 2 busy Tokyo streets. Draw the curtain back and the house is fully open to the street, exposing wide terraces on both the east and south sides of the living room. Bond's point was that Farnsworth was only ever transparent visually. His house could genuinely open and close like a person shedding layers, complete with glazed doors behind the fabric for actual insulation once winter set in. 15. Maison à Bordeaux, France. Rem Koolhaas designed this in 1998 for a client paralyzed in a car accident who wanted a house complex enough to define his world rather than a simple single-story home that would just accommodate a wheelchair. The ground floor is a glass room, half in the hillside and half floating above it, and the heart of the whole house is a 3 by 3.5 meter hydraulic elevator platform that becomes an office, a kitchen, or a bedroom depending on where it stops. Time magazine named it Best Design of 1998, and tragically, the client the house was built for died just 3 years after moving in, meaning he only got a brief window to actually use the elevator platform Koolhaas designed entirely around his needs. 16. Wimbledon House, London. Richard Rogers, decades before Lloyd's of London made him famous, built this steel and glass machine for living for his own parents in 1968. Bright yellow structural ribs, full-height sliding glass at each end, and originally not even a front gate. Grade 2 listed and now owned by Harvard's Graduate School of Design, who use it as a residency space for visiting fellows, meaning students today can actually sleep inside the house that helped launch Rogers toward becoming one of the most influential architects of his generation, the same man who'd go on to design the Pompidou Center and Lloyd's headquarters. 17. Rose Seidler House, Sydney. Harry Seidler designed this for his own mother and father in 1950, fresh off studying under Walter Gropius at Harvard. Glass walls, cubic forms, a flat roof, nothing like it had ever been built in Australia. It won the country's most prestigious architecture medal in 1951 and now is a heritage-listed museum, restored right down to its original 1950s furniture collection, considered one of the most important post-war design archives in the whole country. And the house is named not after Harry Seidler himself, but after his mother, who pushed for it to be built the most. 18. Ray Kapp Residence, Pacific Palisades. Kapp built his own family home in 1967 on a hillside riddled with underground springs. Everyone said it was unbuildable. His solution, 6 concrete towers supporting laminated wood beams, with the redwood and glass house hovering over the canyon like a treehouse. His family finally listed it for sale for the first time ever in early 2026 at $11.5 million, decades after Kapp bought the original, supposedly unbuildable lot for just $17,000 back in 1962, riddled with underground springs that every other architect in the area had already turned down. 19. H House, Maastricht, Netherlands. Will Aritz built this for a dancer and actor around a formal garden, using only a handful of columns to support 2 concrete floor slabs wrapped entirely in glass. There are no interior walls at all, just curtains that slide to define rooms as needed, shifting from transparent to fully opaque with the seasons, which lets the couple control exactly how much of the surrounding garden they want visible at any given moment. All while sitting behind a formal garden the family had already been quietly cultivating for years before the house was even built. 20. V House, Maastricht, Netherlands. Also by Wheel Eretz, this one's for a vintage Aston Martin collector, squeezed between two historic buildings in medieval Maastricht. The living room floats on steel tension rods above a garage holding 7 or 8 cars, visible right through the fritted glass facade below. The entry doors have no handles. They're opened remotely from an iPhone from anywhere in the world, and the whole front facade was designed to angle awkwardly between its two much older neighbors, since the city legally required it to fit within their existing rooflines, forcing Eretz to essentially cut a triangular notch straight into the design as a compromise. 21. Villa Kogelhof, Netherlands. Paul de Ruyter built this energy-neutral glass box floating on a steel V-frame above a protected ecological estate in Zeeland, with an underground level tucked below for parking, storage, and a workspace. It generates its own electricity, heats its own water, and recycles its own waste. The local government only granted permission after the owners agreed to return the surrounding farmland to nature, resulting in 71,000 newly planted trees. And the entire project took 6 years from first design to final completion in 2013, with the villa's electricity coming entirely from rooftop solar cells and a specially built windmill on the property. 22. Olnik Spanu House, Garrison, New York. Alberto Campo Baeza designed this Mies-inspired glass box on the Hudson River, 122 feet long, resting on a concrete platform like a table with 10 legs, with the bedrooms and bathrooms tucked into a cement box hidden below the glass level entirely. It's since become the summer venue for an annual contemporary Italian art program hosted by its owners, Nancy Olnik and Giorgio Spanu, who invite a different Italian artist every year to create a site-specific piece somewhere across the property's forests and gardens, turning what's already a striking piece of architecture into a living, rotating art venue. 23. Skywood House, Buckinghamshire, England. Graham Phillips, the former CEO of Foster Plus Partners, designed this glass box in the woods for his own retirement in the 1990s, and it won a REBA Award in 1999. It's since become one of the most filmed private houses in Britain. Cameron Diaz shot scenes there with a pet cheetah for the counselor, and it starred in Renault's famous Va Va Voom advert. Pretty remarkable for a house Phillips originally built purely as a personal retirement project, tucked behind a modest suburban bungalow near an airfield, before it grew into one of the most requested filming locations in the entire London area. 24. Glass Pavilion, Garrafe Desert, Spain. Slovenian studio Office Architecti built this research prototype in one of Europe's harshest climates, temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius, to test whether advanced coated glass alone with zero shading could keep a house livable, developed in collaboration with glass manufacturer Guardian Glass, specifically to push the material past what anyone thought a fully glazed structure could survive. Architect Spela Videchnik put it bluntly, with bad glass, whoever lived there could die. It's built specifically for stargazing on elevated ground with almost zero light pollution in a region already famous for its traditional troglodyte homes dug straight into the clay, since summer temperatures here can push well past 40 degrees in the shade. 25. Los Terrenos, Monterrey, Mexico. Tatiana Bilbao designed this 2016 forest retreat using mirrored glass alongside rammed earth and clay brick, so the reflective volume essentially camouflages itself among the trees. From the outside, it disappears into the woods. From inside, it's fully transparent, split into 3 separate volumes for glass, earth, and wood, arranged around a curved pool so no single material ever dominates the whole composition, letting the house shift character depending on which side you're approaching from. 26. Glass Villa in the Lake, Cotswolds, England. Dutch firm Meccano completed this in 2018 with a basement floor sitting 3.5 meters below the actual surface of the lake it sits in, containing a cinema and a wellness spa area. A single curved bridge angled specifically to avoid disturbing the surrounding plant life connects it to the road. Every corner of the house is designed to make you feel like you're living directly on the water, and it's part of a wider 340-hectare development eventually planned to include up to 90 homes scattered across 4 separate lakes, with the whole complex managed under a single luxury development brand. 27. Glass House, Pirque, Chile. Not a house for people, a house for plants. Architect Max Nunez built this fully glazed pavilion to contain a captive tropical forest, complete with mechanical systems that recreate an entirely different climate inside. Humans are just occasional visitors here. Ferns, orchids, and moss are the actual residents, with their entire daily routine of water and ventilation calibrated to the natural circadian rhythm of a completely different climate zone than the one right outside the glass. So the ferns and orchids inside effectively live on a totally different clock than the Chilean countryside surrounding them. 28. Crystal Pavilion, Tra Vinh, Vietnam. Local studio Da Vang wrapped this 2025 residence in a curved facade of over 3,000 individual glass bricks, filtering daylight into the interior while still giving the family privacy from the street. It's part of a growing wave of Vietnamese architects using glass brick to solve dense urban housing without sacrificing light, tackling exactly the same problem generations of narrow Vietnamese townhouses have always faced: how to let daylight into a home squeezed tight between its neighbors on every side, using a material that filters light in without ever compromising the family's privacy from the busy street out front. 29. The Notter House, Stockholm Archipelago, Sweden. Frenchman Charles Sacalotto bought an old wooden house on a Swedish island in 2002, then enclosed the entire thing inside an $84,000 commercial greenhouse originally built for growing tomatoes. The concept, called Notter House, was pioneered by Swedish architect Bengt Warn in the 1970s, a house inside a greenhouse, warm enough to skip a sewage connection entirely, since the enclosed space lets residents grow fruit and vegetables from far warmer climates right alongside their own front door, essentially turning an entire private house into one giant heated greenhouse ecosystem that needs almost no outside energy input to stay warm through the Swedish winter. 30. The Mirror Cube, Tree Hotel, Sweden. We'll end in the forest of Harads, northern Sweden, where Tham and Videgard built a perfect 4-meter glass cube wrapped in mirrored film and hung it around a single pine tree. It reflects the forest so precisely it nearly disappears, except to birds, who get a subtle infrared warning film so they don't fly straight into it. At just 4 meters cubed, it's tiny enough to feel almost like a piece of jewelry hung in the trees, yet it's become one of the most photographed hotel rooms on the entire planet, part of a wider collection of equally strange treehouse cabins that put the tiny village of Harads permanently on the architectural map.